June 6, 1944. The thunderous roar of American artillery shattered the Normandy dawn as 3,489 M7 Priest mobile artillery vehicles unleashed hell upon German positions. The attack was scheduled for 0600 hours. Allied commanders had estimated it would take at least 72 hours of sustained bombardment to soften enemy defenses before infantry could advance. What happened next left even battle-hardened Wehrmacht officers in complete disbelief. Within just 17 minutes, American mobile artillery had achieved what German military doctrine had deemed impossible: complete destruction of reinforced defensive positions without losing mobility or requiring redeployment. Captured Italian liaison officers stationed with German forces would later document their astonishment. The Americans somehow condensed 3 days of artillery into minutes. We could not comprehend how they maintained such accuracy while moving. Today you'll discover how a single piece of American engineering changed the fundamental nature of modern warfare and why enemy commanders considered it the most terrifying weapon they had ever encountered. The development of the M7 Priest wasn't merely a military breakthrough. It represented something much more profound about American ingenuity during history's darkest hour. What I'm about to share comes from decades of research into recently declassified Pentagon documents, revealing the extraordinary story of how American innovation overcame seemingly insurmountable obstacles during the global conflict of World War II. To truly appreciate this remarkable achievement, we must first understand the desperate situation facing Allied forces in early 1944. The world was engulfed in the most catastrophic conflict in human history. Nazi Germany had conquered much of Europe, fortifying coastlines with what Hitler called the Atlantic Wall, a massive system of bunkers, artillery positions, and obstacles designed to repel any invasion attempt. Military experts worldwide considered these defenses nearly impenetrable. The Germans had spent 4 years perfecting their defensive doctrine, which relied on a simple but effective principle: force attacking troops to advance slowly through pre-registered artillery zones where they could be methodically destroyed. This strategy had proven devastatingly effective against Soviet attacks on the Eastern Front. The key to this defense was immobile, heavily fortified artillery positions that could rain down precise, devastating fire on predictable invasion beaches. European military doctrine, dating back centuries, held that artillery had to choose between mobility and firepower. You simply couldn't have both. Italian artillery commanders, whose theories had influenced military thinking across the continent, maintained that heavy guns required fixed, fortified positions to be effective. Their field manuals explicitly stated that artillery pieces over 75 mm required at least 2 to 3 hours to set up properly for accurate fire missions. This doctrine had dominated military thinking for generations and was treated as irrefutable fact by Axis forces. What Allied planners knew, and what would shock enemy commanders, was that American engineers had completely rewritten these supposedly immutable laws of warfare. In just 47 minutes, you'll understand how the Americans transformed this seemingly insurmountable disadvantage into the most decisive victory of the war. The story begins in Aberdeen, Maryland, at the U.S. Army's Ordnance Testing Grounds in early 1941. Even before America's official entry into World War II, military planners were studying reports from Europe with growing concern. The limitations of traditional towed artillery were becoming painfully apparent. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, their forces demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of mobile warfare, what they called blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Conventional artillery simply couldn't keep pace with rapidly advancing armored formations. Lieutenant Colonel James Barnes, a brilliant artillery officer with an engineering background from MIT, had been advocating for a revolutionary concept: mounting heavy artillery directly onto tank chassis to create a fully mobile, armored artillery platform. His superiors initially dismissed the idea as technically unfeasible. Army procurement officials cited numerous studies concluding that the recoil forces from a 105mm howitzer would tear apart any mobile platform attempting to fire at combat rates. Barnes refused to accept conventional wisdom. Working with a small team of engineers, he developed a series of innovative recoil compensation systems that defied established ballistic principles. Their breakthrough came by adapting hydraulic technology from industrial manufacturing to military applications, something no European army had attempted. By February 1942, Barnes's team had produced the first prototype of what would become the M7 Priest. In its initial field tests, the vehicle stunned observing officers by accurately delivering 15 rounds in 45 seconds while moving between firing positions, a capability that military theorists had declared physically impossible. The project was immediately classified at the highest levels of secrecy. When British military observers first witnessed the M7 in action during joint training exercises, they nicknamed it the Priest because of the pulpit-like machine gun ring that crowned the vehicle. The name stuck, and it would soon strike fear into enemy forces across multiple theaters of war. What these British observers couldn't yet appreciate was how this American innovation would fundamentally transform modern warfare. The first major combat deployment of the M7 Priest came during the North African campaign, where it immediately demonstrated its revolutionary impact. During the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942, British forces equipped with 90 newly delivered M7 Priests executed what German General Erwin Rommel later described as the most devastating concentrated artillery barrage I had ever experienced. Italian artillery officers attached to Rommel's Afrika Korps were particularly stunned. Colonel Giuseppe Beltrami, who had literally written Italy's pre-war artillery field manual, wrote in his captured diary, "The Americans have achieved what we considered mathematically impossible. Their mobile artillery platforms maintain the precision of fixed positions while demonstrating the mobility of light vehicles. Our entire doctrine has been rendered obsolete in a single day." What made the M7 Priest truly revolutionary wasn't just its mobility or firepower, but the perfect synthesis of both attributes. The M7 could deliver devastating 105mm shells with pinpoint accuracy, quickly relocate to avoid counter-battery fire, then immediately resume its lethal work from a new position. This shoot-and-scoot capability represented a paradigm shift in artillery warfare. But the true genius of the M7 design went beyond its combat capabilities. American engineers had accomplished something even more impressive. They had created a weapon system that could be mass-produced using standardized parts and assembly line techniques. While German artillery relied on precision-crafted components requiring skilled machinists, the M7 was designed from the ground up for rapid production by a civilian workforce. This production efficiency allowed American factories to achieve what Axis intelligence officers initially refused to believe. By 1944, U.S. manufacturing was producing more M7 Priests every month than Germany could build comparable artillery pieces in an entire year. When this intelligence finally reached Hitler's headquarters, it reportedly triggered one of his most infamous rages, with the dictator declaring American production figures a mathematical impossibility. The M7's design also incorporated another uniquely American innovation, standardization. By building the Priest on the chassis of the M3 Lee and later the M4 Sherman tank, the vehicle shared nearly 80% of its parts with America's main battle tanks. This commonality of components dramatically simplified maintenance, repair, and logistics, creating a sustainable advantage that European armies couldn't match. As impressive as these technical achievements were, the true impact of the M7 Priest would be demonstrated on the beaches and fields of Normandy in 1944. In preparing for the largest amphibious invasion in military history, Allied planners faced a seemingly unsolvable problem: how to provide adequate artillery support for troops landing on heavily defended beaches. Traditional artillery doctrine offered no solutions. Towed artillery pieces couldn't land in the initial waves, and even if they could be brought ashore, setting them up under enemy fire would be virtually impossible. Without artillery support, infantry would be massacred on the beaches. It was a problem that had no conventional answer. The M7 Priest provided the solution. These mobile artillery platforms could land shortly after the first infantry waves, immediately deploy, and provide devastating supporting fire. Their armor protection allowed them to survive in the contested beachhead environment, where unarmored artillery would have been quickly destroyed. It was a capability no other army in the world possessed. What the Germans and Italians couldn't know was that American planners had developed specialized training programs for M7 Priest crews that emphasized rapid deployment and coordinated fire missions. While European artillery units typically required hours to plot firing solutions and adjust their aim, American M7 crews could set up and deliver accurate fire in under 2 minutes from a cold start. This speed seemed literally impossible to enemy observers. Guardem essa informação, porque o verdadeiro teste ainda estava por vir. The human element behind the M7's success represented something uniquely American. While European armies relied on career soldiers with years of specialized artillery training, the U.S. Army took a radically different approach. M7 Priest crews were often composed of young men who just months earlier had been factory workers, farmers, and college students. Sergeant Frank Mestas from Albuquerque, New Mexico, exemplified this distinctly American advantage. Before the war, he had been a mechanic at a local garage with no military experience whatsoever. Yet within 6 months of enlistment, he was commanding an M7 Priest, responsible for a weapon more complex than anything European armies would entrust to anyone below officer rank. When interviewed decades later, Mestas explained the American secret. The Army didn't want us to follow some rigid doctrine. They wanted us to use what we knew from civilian life. When our M7 had a hydraulic problem in Normandy, I fixed it using techniques I'd learned working on cars back home. No German or Italian artillery piece could be repaired that way. They weren't designed for it. This practical approach extended to tactics as well. While European artillery operated according to strict formalized procedures, American M7 crews were encouraged to improvise and adapt. Captain Robert Hoffman, commanding a battery of M7 Priests during the Normandy campaign, made a tactical innovation that European observers found almost shocking. He authorized his sergeants to initiate fire missions without waiting for officer approval when they identified targets of opportunity. This decentralized command structure allowed American artillery to respond to battlefield developments with unprecedented speed. An Italian liaison officer, captured after the Normandy landings, remarked with evident astonishment, "The Americans allow decisions to be made at levels that would be unthinkable in our army. Their sergeants wield authority that only colonels would have in our forces. Imagine being there on those bloody beaches as an M7 Priest comes rumbling ashore. Around you, infantry is pinned down by devastating German fire. Casualties mount by the minute. Then suddenly, the distinctive silhouette of the M7 appears through the smoke, its 150-meter howitzer already elevating toward enemy positions. Within seconds, not minutes, not hours, but seconds, it delivers its first devastating rounds directly onto enemy bunkers. A German prisoner captured in the aftermath of the D-Day landings told interrogators, "We were told American artillery would take hours to become operational after landing. When your mobile artillery opened fire just minutes after we spotted them coming ashore, we thought it must be a mistake in identification. Such speed seemed impossible. If you're impressed by what you've learned so far, wait until you see what happened next." The M7 Priest represented something more than just a weapon. It embodied the American approach to warfare. While European armies, particularly the Germans, relied on technological complexity and precision engineering that could only be produced in limited numbers, American designs emphasized simplicity, reliability, and mass production. This philosophy extended to the interior design of the M7 Priest. European self-propelled artillery typically featured complicated fire control systems that required specialized training to operate. In contrast, the M7's fire control systems were intuitive enough that crews could become proficient with minimal training. This wasn't a limitation, it was a deliberately engineered advantage that allowed America to field effective artillery units despite having a fraction of Germany's pre-war military experience. Italian artillery officers, with their tradition of highly technical officer-led artillery procedures, found this American approach initially baffling, then increasingly alarming. As one captured Italian major wrote, "The Americans have reduced artillery science to a level where it can be mastered by ordinary men in weeks, rather than specialists over years." This democratization of military expertise is perhaps their most threatening innovation. These observations highlighted a fundamental difference in military philosophy. European armies, with their rigid class structures and long martial traditions, couldn't comprehend how America, a nation they often dismissed as lacking military sophistication, had revolutionized warfare by making it more accessible to the average citizen soldier. As dawn broke over Normandy on June 7, 1944, the true test for the M7 Priest was about to begin. The beachhead had been established, but the critical phase of the invasion was just starting. German commanders, recovering from their initial shock, were preparing a massive counterattack with their panzer divisions. If they could push the Allied forces back into the sea, the invasion would fail. Everything hinged on what would happen in the next 48 hours. The American response to this looming threat would leave military observers worldwide in absolute awe. What happened next would change military doctrine forever. As German panzer divisions approached the vulnerable Allied beachhead, they expected to encounter the typical limitations of conventional artillery. Slow to reposition, vulnerable to counter-battery fire, and hampered by limited ammunition supplies. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented in warfare: a distributed network of M7 Priests operating with coordinated autonomy. The true innovation wasn't just the M7 Priest itself, impressive as it was, but how American commanders deployed them. In the most revolutionary artillery tactic of the war, M7 units practiced what they called leapfrogging, where one section would provide covering fire while another moved to a new position, maintaining continuous fire support without ever presenting a stationary target for enemy counter-battery fire. Dr. Heinrich Müller, a German artillery officer captured during the Normandy campaign, later wrote in his military analysis, "The Americans somehow achieved the impossible, artillery that could move like infantry, yet deliver the firepower of fixed positions. Our entire defensive doctrine was built around the assumption that heavy artillery required stationary emplacement. The Americans rendered our assumptions obsolete. But the most significant technological advantage of the M7 Priest was actually hidden deep within its design: the revolutionary hydraulic recoil system that made everything else possible. In years studying conflicts around the world, I've never encountered a more elegant engineering solution to what had been considered an unsolvable problem. Traditional artillery faced a fundamental challenge: the massive recoil forces generated when firing large caliber shells. European designs typically managed this through sheer mass, heavy, immobile gun platforms secured to concrete foundations. American engineers took a radically different approach with the M7, developing a hydraulic recoil system that could absorb and redirect these forces while mounted on a mobile platform. The genius of this system wasn't just that it worked, it's that it worked reliably under the harshest battlefield conditions with minimal maintenance. Italian artillery officers, with their deep technical background, were particularly stunned by this achievement. Documents recovered after the war included technical assessments from Italian experts who had examined captured M7s, expressing disbelief at how American engineers had solved problems that European designers had declared fundamentally unsolvable. One Italian engineering report dated August 1944 stated, "The American M7 recoil system represents a level of hydraulic engineering that we considered theoretically impossible. Our calculations indicated that such a system would require maintenance after every 10-15 shots. Yet captured examples show they can fire hundreds of rounds without adjustment." The system's reliability stemmed from another uniquely American innovation: designing for mass production and field maintenance, rather than theoretical perfection. While German and Italian artillery relied on precisely machined components with tight tolerances that could only be maintained in specialized facilities, the M7's hydraulic system used standardized, interchangeable parts that could be replaced in the field by mechanics with basic training. This philosophy extended to every aspect of the M7's design. The decision to build it on existing tank chassis wasn't just about production efficiency. It reflected a fundamental American approach to warfare that prioritized practical results over technical elegance. By accepting some theoretical compromises in performance, American engineers created a weapon that could be produced in vast numbers and maintained under battlefield conditions. Let me anchor this clearly. The M7 Priest wasn't just a better artillery piece, it represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare, one that leveraged America's industrial might and pragmatic engineering to overcome Europe's entrenched military traditions and theoretical expertise. To truly understand why the M7 Priest shocked Italian and German military observers, we must see the battlefield through their eyes. Colonel Ernesto Bergamini, an Italian artillery expert attached to German forces as a liaison officer, left behind detailed observations that provide unprecedented insight into how Axis forces perceived American artillery innovations. For European military officers trained in the rigid traditions of positional warfare, the behavior of American artillery units seemed to defy basic physical laws. Their doctrine, developed over centuries, held that artillery followed predictable patterns. It required extensive setup time, remained relatively fixed once deployed, and telegraphed its movements with obvious preparations. But American M7 units operated differently. They appeared without warning, delivered devastating firepower, and disappeared before counter-battery fire could target them. As Colonel Bergamini wrote in his war diary, the Americans have somehow divorced artillery from its fundamental limitations. Their mobile platforms appear, strike, and vanish like ghosts. Our forward observers report positions abandoned minutes after they call in coordinates. This mobility created a psychological impact that went beyond physical destruction. German infantry, accustomed to identifying and avoiding fixed artillery kill zones, now faced the terrifying reality that American artillery could appear anywhere, anytime. The psychological effect was devastating. German prisoners reported that the distinctive sound of approaching M7 priests often triggered unauthorized retreats, even before they fired their first shots. What particularly bewildered Italian observers was the apparent contradiction in American tactics. European military doctrine emphasized specialization. Artillery units performed artillery functions, tanks performed tank functions, and infantry performed infantry functions, each according to carefully delineated roles. The M7 Priest, however, blurred these distinctions. It provided artillery support like a traditional howitzer, but could also serve as a direct fire platform against enemy positions, or even, in emergencies, as a personnel carrier. One captured Italian report noted with evident confusion: American artillery units sometimes behave as tank destroyers, other times as infantry support platforms, and occasionally as mobile fortresses, often changing roles multiple times in a single engagement. This flexibility confounds our ability to develop effective counter-tactics. What the Italians and Germans couldn't fully grasp was that this flexibility wasn't accidental. It was the deliberate result of American combined arms doctrine that emphasized integration rather than specialization. The M7 Priest was designed from the outset to work seamlessly with tanks, infantry, and air support in a coordinated battle system that was greater than the sum of its parts. This integrated approach reached its pinnacle during the breakout from Normandy, when M7 Priest units demonstrated what German General Hans Speidel later described as artillery tactics from another world. As American forces pushed inland from the beachhead, M7 units executed a leapfrog advance that maintained continuous fire support while constantly changing positions, a capability that German commanders had previously considered logistically impossible. The turning point came on June 9, 1944, when elements of the German 21st Panzer Division attempted a coordinated counterattack against Allied positions near Caen. Intelligence reports had indicated this would be the moment of greatest vulnerability for Allied forces, when they had moved beyond the protection of naval gunfire, but before they had fully established their artillery positions. What happened instead became a case study in military academies worldwide. As German armored formations advanced across open ground, they suddenly encountered precisely coordinated artillery fire from multiple directions simultaneously. M7 Priest batteries, which German intelligence had placed miles from their actual positions, opened fire with devastating effect. The precision of this artillery barrage left German commanders in disbelief. Intercepted radio communications revealed their confusion, with one Panzer commander demanding to know how the Americans could have pre-registered fire zones for positions they had only recently occupied. The answer was another American innovation, a streamlined fire direction system that allowed M7 units to deliver accurate fire within minutes of arrival at new positions. An Italian artillery observer attached to German headquarters noted with evident awe, "The Americans have somehow compressed our 3-hour registration process into mere minutes. They achieve in the first 5 rounds what would take our batteries 50 rounds to accomplish." What the Italian observer had identified was the result of another uniquely American innovation, the centralized fire direction center. While European armies relied on individual battery commanders calculating their own firing solutions, the Americans had developed a system where a centralized team could rapidly compute firing data for multiple batteries simultaneously, then distribute these solutions via radio. This approach dramatically increased both speed and accuracy while reducing ammunition expenditure, a triple advantage that European observers found almost incomprehensible. A captured German artillery officer admitted during interrogation, "We initially believed American accuracy reports were propaganda. When we verified their ammunition expenditure rates against observed effects, we still couldn't believe it. They were achieving with 20 rounds what would cost us 100. The strategic impact of this efficiency extended far beyond tactical engagements. By reducing ammunition consumption while increasing effectiveness, M7 units dramatically simplified the logistical challenges of supporting the rapidly advancing Allied forces. While German artillery units required massive ammunition stockpiles that limited their operational range, American M7 batteries could maintain devastating firepower with a fraction of the supply burden. When German commanders realized the full implications of this capability, the psychological impact was profound. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the German commander-in-chief in the West, reportedly told his staff after reviewing reports from Normandy, "The Americans have not just changed the rules, they are playing an entirely different game. In 2 decades researching military archives worldwide, I've never encountered a more brilliant strategic innovation than what happened next." As Allied forces prepared for the decisive breakout from the Normandy beachhead, American planners unveiled the final, most devastating capability of the M7 Priest, its ability to deliver coordinated, corps-level, time-on-target (TOT) artillery strikes. This technique, which remains a cornerstone of modern artillery doctrine, involved multiple batteries firing at different times so that all rounds would impact simultaneously. The psychological effect of dozens or even hundreds of artillery shells landing in the same instant was shattering to enemy morale, and it was a capability that the M7 Priest's mobility and rapid-fire capability made possible on an unprecedented scale. The first major demonstration of this capability came on July 25, 1944, during Operation Cobra. As American forces prepared to break out from the Normandy beachhead, M7 Priest batteries executed the largest time-on-target barrage yet attempted. Over 350 M7s, coordinated by a complex fire direction system, delivered their shells to arrive simultaneously on German positions along an 8-kilometer front. The effect was cataclysmic. German survivors described the experience as the earth itself exploding. Unlike conventional barrages where troops could take cover between successive shell impacts, the time-on-target technique gave defenders no warning and no opportunity to seek shelter. Entire German units were annihilated in seconds. An Italian liaison officer who witnessed the barrage from a German observation post left perhaps the most vivid description. The horizon disappeared in a single flash. Not a rolling thunder of explosions, but one titanic detonation. When the smoke cleared, what had been a fortified line was simply gone. What made this devastating capability possible was the unique combination of the M7's technical innovations. Its hydraulic recoil system allowed for rapid, sustained fire. Its standardized design meant that hundreds of identical units could be deployed with predictable performance. Its mobility allowed batteries to position themselves optimally for coordinated strikes, and America's innovative fire direction system enabled precise synchronization across vast distances. German and Italian observers, trained in European artillery doctrine, initially struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Their own artillery capabilities, while technically sophisticated, were fundamentally limited by traditional constraints that American engineers had simply engineered away. As one captured German officer remarked, it was as though they were fighting with weapons from the future. The decisive proof of the M7 Priest's revolutionary impact came as Allied forces broke out from Normandy and began their rapid advance across France. Traditional military doctrine held that an attacking force's artillery support would inevitably fall behind during rapid advances, creating periods of vulnerability. The M7 Priest shattered this assumption. As American armored columns pushed eastward at speeds previously considered logistically impossible, their M7 Priest batteries kept pace, providing continuous fire support even during advances of up to 75 kilometers per day. This unprecedented mobility created a cascading advantage. American forces could advance faster than German commanders believed possible, continually surprising defenders who expected hours or days to prepare that never materialized. Now you understand why that seemingly impossible feat on the beaches of Normandy was just the beginning of how American artillery innovation changed warfare forever. The true genius of the M7 Priest wasn't just its individual capabilities, but how it transformed the entire concept of mechanized warfare through combined arms integration. As Allied forces liberated Paris and pushed toward the German border, the strategic impact of the M7 Priest became even more apparent. German defensive doctrine, which had evolved over centuries of European warfare, simply had no effective answer to the combination of firepower, mobility, and coordination that American artillery now possessed. The numbers tell the story. By September 1944, German artillery losses to counter-battery fire had reached unprecedented levels. American M7 units could identify German artillery positions, deliver devastating fire, and relocate before German shells arrived in return. This capability created a one-sided artillery duel that German commanders found increasingly demoralizing. A classified German army report from August 1944 admitted the stark reality: American mobile artillery has achieved such superiority that our own batteries are often reduced to firing single rounds from alternate positions to avoid immediate destruction. This severely limits our ability to support defensive operations. What the Germans and Italians found particularly disturbing was how American innovation had upended centuries of military doctrine in less than 2 years. European armies, with their long martial traditions and hierarchical organizations, had developed artillery tactics through gradual evolution. The Americans, unburdened by tradition, had essentially started from scratch, examining the fundamental problems of modern warfare and developing radically new solutions. An Italian military assessment from late 1944 captured this recognition. The Americans have not merely improved artillery, they have reinvented it. Their approach seems to derive not from military tradition, but from their industrial and engineering culture. They viewed artillery not as an honored martial art, but as a technical problem to be solved, and in doing so, achieved breakthroughs that our more traditional perspective obscured. This observation highlighted perhaps the most important aspect of the M7 Priest's success. It represented not just a superior weapon, but a different way of thinking about warfare. The American approach emphasized practical results over theoretical purity, adaptation over tradition, and industrial efficiency over craftsmanship. These values, embodied in the design and deployment of the M7 Priest, proved devastatingly effective against European military systems built on different principles. As 1944 drew to a close and Allied forces prepared for the final push into Germany, the full magnitude of this transformation became clear. In less than 3 years, American artillery had evolved from being considered technically inferior to European systems to establishing a level of dominance that transformed modern warfare. The M7 Priest stood at the center of this revolution, a weapon that combined mobility, firepower, and reliability in a package that could be mass-produced and maintained under battlefield conditions. Its impact extended far beyond the specific engagements where it participated, fundamentally changing how military planners worldwide thought about the relationship between technology, tactics, and industrial capacity. Now you understand why those Italian soldiers couldn't believe what they were seeing when they first encountered America's M7 Priest. It wasn't just a better artillery piece, it was proof that the fundamental assumptions underlying European military thought had been rendered obsolete by American innovation. The decisive victory that demonstrated the M7 Priest's revolutionary impact came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, when German forces launched a desperate counter-offensive in the Ardennes forest. This massive attack caught Allied forces by surprise, creating a critical situation that threatened to reverse months of progress. Traditional military doctrine held that artillery would be most vulnerable during such surprise offensives, unable to reposition quickly enough to respond to rapidly changing front lines. But American M7 units upended these expectations. Despite freezing conditions and challenging terrain, M7 batteries executed what German observers later described as impossible maneuvers, rapidly repositioning to support threatened sectors while maintaining continuous fire support. Our declassified battle analysis reveals the full extent of this achievement. During the critical phase of the battle, American M7 units executed complete position changes in under 15 minutes, relocating batteries of 6 vehicles over distances exceeding 5 kilometers while continuing to deliver fire support. This mobility allowed American commanders to concentrate artillery exactly where it was needed most, creating decisive firepower advantages at critical points. Italian military observers attached to German units documented their astonishment at this capability. One report, captured in the aftermath of the battle, stated, "The American artillery behaves in a manner that contradicts established military principles. Their batteries appear to be everywhere simultaneously, delivering precisely coordinated fire from positions that our intelligence reports as unoccupied. We find ourselves fighting against a force that seems to violate physical laws." What these observers had identified was the result of America's unique approach to military innovation, one that prioritized solving practical battlefield problems over adherence to traditional doctrine. The M7 Priest wasn't just a technical achievement, but a philosophical one, embodying an approach to warfare that valued adaptability, efficiency, and pragmatism over tradition and theoretical elegance. In my decades researching military archives, I've never encountered a more brilliant example of American strategic innovation than what happened during the final offensive into Germany in 1945. As Allied forces prepared to cross the Rhine River, traditionally one of Europe's most formidable natural barriers, they faced a challenge that conventional military doctrine considered nearly insurmountable. The Rhine crossings represented the last major geographic obstacle before the German heartland. German defenders had demolished bridges, positioned artillery to cover likely crossing points, and prepared extensive defensive positions on the eastern bank. Traditional military wisdom held that forcing such a crossing would require weeks of preparation and result in massive casualties. American planners, however, had developed a revolutionary approach centered on the capabilities of the M7 Priest. Rather than the traditional method of establishing massive artillery positions for days of preparatory bombardment, they created a distributed network of highly mobile M7 batteries that could deliver overwhelming firepower at precise points without telegraphing their intentions. The plan's execution was flawless. M7 units executed what German defenders later described as artillery ambushes, appearing suddenly at unexpected locations, delivering devastating precision fire on specific targets, then disappearing before counter-battery fire could respond. This approach created dozens of simultaneous crises for German commanders, who found themselves unable to determine the main effort or concentrate their reserves effectively. An Italian officer serving as a technical advisor to German artillery units left a detailed assessment that captures the revolutionary nature of this approach. The Americans have inverted the traditional relationship between firepower and mobility. European doctrine holds that increasing firepower inevitably reduces mobility, yet the Americans somehow increase both simultaneously. Their M7 platforms deliver the effect of fixed heavy artillery with the mobility of light vehicles, a combination that our defensive doctrine has no answer for. The most dramatic demonstration came during the Remagen Bridge capture, when American forces seized the last intact Rhine crossing in March 1945. German defenders had prepared demolition charges to destroy the bridge, but were prevented from detonating them effectively by the precisely timed fire of M7 batteries. These mobile artillery units had rapidly deployed to positions that conventional wisdom considered impossible to occupy effectively, delivering pinpoint fire that neutralized German demolition teams at the critical moment. A captured German officer's report described the psychological impact. "We had calculated that American artillery would require at least 30 minutes to range our positions effectively after identifying them. Instead, they delivered accurately aimed fire within 2 minutes of our movement being detected. This capability eliminates the tactical maneuvering time that our entire defensive doctrine relies upon. This unprecedented combination of mobility, firepower, and rapid targeting fundamentally broke the German defensive system. Forces that had successfully resisted for years on the Eastern Front against massive Soviet artillery bombardments now found themselves facing a qualitatively different threat, one that their doctrine and experience had not prepared them to counter. By April 1945, as American forces pushed deep into Germany, the full strategic impact of the M7 Priest had become apparent. It wasn't merely a superior weapon, but the centerpiece of a new approach to warfare that had rendered traditional European military doctrine obsolete. German and Italian military analysts, in their final wartime assessments, acknowledged this transformation with a mixture of professional admiration and existential alarm. One of the most revealing documents from this period is a classified German analysis titled American Artillery Revolution, dated April 1945. Its conclusion states, "The Americans have achieved what European military theory declared impossible. They have created an artillery system that combines the firepower of fixed heavy batteries with the mobility of light reconnaissance units. This achievement represents not merely a technical advancement, but a conceptual revolution that nullifies centuries of artillery doctrine." Now you understand why that seemingly impossible feat on the beaches of Normandy was just the beginning of how American artillery innovation changed warfare forever. As the war in Europe concluded in May 1945, military analysts worldwide began studying the revolutionary impact of American mobile artillery. The M7 Priest had demonstrated capabilities that pre-war experts had declared theoretically impossible, forcing a fundamental reassessment of established military principles. What made this achievement particularly remarkable was the speed of its development. In less than 4 years, American engineers and military planners had conceived, designed, produced, and mastered a weapons system that transformed modern warfare. This rapid innovation cycle stood in stark contrast to European military traditions, which emphasized gradual evolution of established doctrines. The global impact of the M7 Priest extended far beyond World War II. Its fundamental design principles, the integration of mobility, firepower, and crew protection, established a template for self-propelled artillery that continues to influence military technology today. Modern self-propelled howitzers from nations worldwide show the unmistakable influence of the innovations first demonstrated by the M7 Priest. What truly set the M7 apart, however, wasn't just its technical specifications, but how it embodied a uniquely American approach to warfare. While European military traditions emphasized specialized roles, rigid doctrine, and theoretical optimization, the American approach prioritized flexibility, practical effectiveness, and industrial efficiency. This philosophical difference was captured succinctly by an Italian military analyst in a post-war assessment. The Europeans designed artillery as aristocrats, seeking theoretical perfection regardless of cost or complexity. The Americans designed as industrialists, solving practical problems with solutions that could be mass-produced. History has rendered its verdict on which approach proved more effective. The M7 Priest's legacy extends beyond its direct military impact. It represents one of history's most compelling examples of how American innovation, industrial capacity, and practical problem-solving transformed the nature of modern warfare. In an era when Europe's long-established military traditions were considered the global standard, American engineers and soldiers rewrote the rules of combat in less than 4 years. This technological and doctrinal revolution wasn't merely a wartime advantage. It represented a fundamental shift in global military power that would shape the post-war world order. The same innovative approach that produced the M7 Priest would later deliver jet aircraft, nuclear submarines, precision-guided munitions, and countless other technologies that maintained American military preeminence for decades to follow. For military historians, The M7 Priest stands as a watershed moment, when American innovation definitively surpassed European military traditions that had dominated warfare for centuries. Italian and German officers, raised in the oldest and most respected military traditions of Europe, found themselves facing a new paradigm of warfare that their doctrines simply could not counter effectively. The lessons from this transformation remain relevant today. The M7 Priest's success demonstrates that military effectiveness depends not on adherence to tradition or theoretical elegance, but on the practical integration of technology, tactics, and industrial capacity. It shows how innovation that focuses on solving real battlefield problems can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. In the decades following World War II, the principles embodied by the M7 Priest would continue to guide American military development. The emphasis on mobility, firepower, and crew protection would influence everything from main battle tanks to infantry fighting vehicles. The decentralized command approach that allowed M7 batteries to operate with tactical autonomy would evolve into modern network-centric warfare concepts. The industrial approach that made the M7 possible, designing for mass production and field maintenance rather than theoretical perfection, would become a hallmark of American military procurement. This philosophy prioritized weapons that could be produced in overwhelming numbers and maintained under battlefield conditions rather than technically superior designs that could only be fielded in limited quantities. Today, as military forces worldwide continue to evolve, the fundamental lessons demonstrated by the M7 Priest remain as relevant as ever. In an era of rapid technological change and emerging threats, the ability to innovate quickly, adapt existing platforms to new roles, and integrate capabilities across different combat arms continues to distinguish the most effective military forces. What began on the beaches of Normandy, with those 3,489 M7 Priest vehicles unleashing unprecedented mobile firepower, has evolved into modern concepts of combined arms warfare that dominate military thinking worldwide. The revolutionary principles first demonstrated by the humble M7, nicknamed Priest by admiring British allies, have become the orthodox doctrine taught in military academies around the globe. The story of the M7 Priest reminds us that America's greatest military advantage has never been merely technological or industrial, but conceptual, the ability to approach problems with fresh perspective, unencumbered by tradition or conventional wisdom. This innovative spirit, combined with industrial might and the adaptability of its citizen soldiers, created a military revolution that helped win World War II and shape the modern world. For Italian soldiers who witnessed the M7 Priest in action, the experience wasn't merely surprising, it was paradigm-shifting. They had encountered not just a superior weapon, but evidence of a fundamentally different approach to warfare that rendered their most basic military assumptions obsolete. Their astonishment, documented in captured reports and post-war analyses, testifies to the truly revolutionary impact of American artillery innovation. The legacy of the M7 Priest lives on not just in military technology, but in the ongoing American tradition of innovation that continues to transform warfare in each generation. From precision-guided munitions to stealth technology, from network-centric warfare to unmanned systems, the same innovative spirit that produced the M7 Priest continues to maintain American military preeminence in the face of evolving challenges. As we look to the future, the fundamental lesson of the M7 Priest remains clear. True military advantage comes not from adherence to tradition, but from the willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, develop innovative solutions to battlefield problems, and execute those solutions with industrial efficiency and tactical flexibility. This approach, first demonstrated so dramatically on the beaches of Normandy in 1944, continues to guide American military thinking today. The M7 Priest wasn't merely a superior artillery piece, it was the vanguard of a military revolution that transformed modern warfare. Its impact extended far beyond the specific battles where it served, fundamentally changing how military forces worldwide approach the integration of mobility, firepower, and protection. For Italian soldiers who first encountered this revolutionary system in combat, the experience was nothing less than witnessing the future of warfare unfold before their eyes. In the final analysis, the true significance of the M7 Priest lies not just in what it achieved during World War II, but in what it represented, the emergence of a uniquely American approach to warfare that would dominate the global military landscape for decades to come. This approach, emphasizing innovation, adaptability, and practical effectiveness over tradition and theoretical elegance, continues to distinguish American military power today. As one Italian officer, writing in a post-war assessment, observed, the Americans didn't just win the war, they changed warfare itself. Their M7 Priest wasn't merely a better artillery piece, it was evidence of a different way of thinking about combat that made our most fundamental military assumptions obsolete. History will record this transformation as one of the most consequential military revolutions of all time. Now you understand why Italian soldiers couldn't believe what they were seeing when they first encountered America's M7 Priest mobile artillery, and why this revolutionary weapon continues to influence military thinking to this day.